Hello and thanks for joining us on Chicago Tonight. I'm Brandis Friedman. Here's what we're looking at. Cleanup is underway after severe storms hit the Chicago region, leaving thousands without power. Is a second round coming? Former federal prosecutors blast U.S. Attorney Andrew Boutros in the wake of the botched Broadview 6 case. We speak with two of them. And Puerto Rican history and pride will fill the streets of Humboldt Park during this weekend's parade and festival. First off tonight, the Chicago area is in for even more severe weather tonight as ComEd crews work to restore power to thousands of residents who lost power in yesterday's storms.
This is not a restoration, it's actually a rebuild. The amount of trees that came down and branches on the infrastructure is significant.
The power utility says more than 480,000 customers lost power in what are believed to be unconfirmed tornadoes and straight-line winds. As of this afternoon, crews were working to bring nearly 119,000 customers back online. The Chicago Department of Streets and Sanitation says it received more than 5,200 tree emergency requests due to the storm. And for tonight, there's more. The area is under a tornado watch until 9 and a flood watch until 11. Nurses at St. Mary of Nazareth Hospital in Ukrainian Village are walking off the job today for a one-day strike to protest what they say is retaliation and union busting. The union representing the 400 nurses says the company that runs the hospital, Prime Healthcare, has fired 6 nurses in retaliation for union organizing efforts. Nurses filed a petition to hold a union election last month and are set to vote next week. Prime Healthcare didn't share the reason the nurses were terminated, but say in a statement, the hospital, quote, respects the right of nurses to engage in lawful protected union activity. We have not and will not retaliate against employees for exercising their lawful rights and have consistently applied long-standing hospital policies that protect safety and patient care. Chicago native Hillary Clinton is back in town. The former Secretary of State was a keynote speaker today at the 37th Women in the Forefront luncheon. The annual event focused on women's leadership and visions for the future.
What I see happening today is this effort to literally turn the clock back on women's rights, on civil rights, on human rights. And when you see this administration firing primarily women and people of color, it's tragic. And they're being largely thrown out, not because of their qualifications, but because they're women.
Clinton also joined the Rainbow Push Coalition's annual conference today. Up next, the so-called Broadview 6 case is riddled with alleged prosecutorial misconduct. 2 former federal prosecutors join us right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by the Alexandra and John Nichols family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
Chicago's U.S. Attorney Andrew Boutros is under fire over his office's handling of the Broadview 6 case. More than 100 former federal prosecutors signed an open letter this week saying Boutros tarnished the office's reputation after prosecutors made improper communications with grand jury members. In the letter, they say, quote, these matters raise questions about whether there is a failure of leadership in the office we deeply respect and whether once forbidden political considerations are infecting prosecutorial decisions. The answer to both questions, in our view, is yes. Joining us are 2 of the letter's signatories, John Gallo, a former assistant U.S. attorney in the Northern District of Illinois, and Patrick Collins, also a former assistant U.S. attorney in the Northern District. Thanks to you both for joining us. So, John, let's start with some of the misconduct that you all detail in the letter. What did Andrew Boutros' office do wrong in the grand jury proceedings in the Broadview 6 case that we've been hearing so much about this week?
Sure. Well, the headlines are vouching by the assistant U.S. attorney in the grand jury, basically saying from a personal perspective, she believed the case was meritorious, so vouching in the grand jury. Talking to grand jurors outside the grand jury room. Questioning, excluding jurors, which she didn't have the power to do anyway, but excluding jurors, asking them to be excluded if they were skeptical about the charges. And then there was issues later with redactions, which is a separate issue.
Right, right. Patrick, what was your reaction when you learned about this alleged misconduct?
Very similar to Judge Perry, and again, Judge Perry, who made these comments that I think really were the impetus for the letter. Judge Perry, experienced judge, but also a former federal prosecutor, said she had never seen anything like this in terms of the misconduct in the grand jury. And she talked about the presumption of regularity. And Brandis, I think the reason that I signed the letter, I love that office. It was some of the best professional moments of my life. It wasn't perfect. A lot of great people there, a lot of great people there today. And I think part of our message was also for the young prosecutors that, you know, do the job, hold the standard. And I think there's, in Judge Perry's eyes, there was a diminishment of the standard.
John, you mentioned the redactions being sort of a separate issue because we know that the attorneys initially redacted a great deal of these transcripts, and then Judge Perry asked for them to be unredacted and to see more. And for those of us who do not practice law, I guess my question was, what of a grand jury transcript is a judge typically allowed to see? And why might they have been taking the step, the attorneys taking the step to redact a grand jury transcript before giving it to a judge?
The answer is whatever she wants to see, she can see. I mean, when you're the judge, you can see whatever you want to see. And so I can't, I'm still befuddled as to what they thought they were doing when they submitted redacted transcripts, other than to try and hide from the court things that happened in the grand jury. So
there are also several pages missing.
Right. So, you know, there's this expression, you know, if someone tries to hide something, that's evidence in consciousness of guilt. So I think that everyone looking, hindsight's 20/20, but if they'd just given the transcripts from the beginning, it would have contextually been much better for them.
How does this alleged misconduct, how does this behavior different from what you knew the U.S. Attorney's Office to be like when you worked there?
This particular circumstance, and this particular case, I'm hoping is an isolated example, because the things that happened in that context, talking to grand jurors about the case outside the grand jury room, personally vouching for the validity of the case, those kinds of things, frankly, were unheard of prior to this circumstance.
Yeah, and Brandis, what I saw in those grand jury transcripts, the grand jury is a secret place. It's actually where investigators go to actually present evidence and actually make your case better. It's said that a grand jury will indict a ham sandwich because I think it goes to the control the prosecutor's office have over the process. What we saw in this case is these grand jurors were asking good questions. They wanted to know the facts. They wanted to understand what a conspiracy is. It's the very questions that if I heard as a prosecutor back when I was there, I would use it to make my case better. But there was a rush to try to get the case indicted, and we'll find out sort of why that rush was. But this grand jury was working. I was so proud to read these grand jurors' questions because it showed that they were actually doing their job. And they were sort of being run over by the folks, which is extraordinarily rare from my 12 years there.
So the U.S. Attorney, Andrew Boutros, he has himself denied any knowledge of the allegations when he appeared before Judge Perry when the case was dismissed or the charges were dropped. He apologized himself. Patrick, is he free of blame here? Should he have known that his attorneys were behaving this way?
You know, he's the leader of the office, and so, you know, the buck stops with him. It stopped with every U.S. attorney that I ever served under. The facts will play out, Brandis. I think there's another case that's now affected, and the Judge Coleman basically said, government, I'm going to have a hearing, and so we'll see. I think I don't know what Mr. Boutros knew and when. That's not my job. The lawyer, there are some very good lawyers that will figure that out if need be. I think what he absolutely is responsible is for the tone and tenor of the office.
So one through line in the letter that you all signed on to was the political interference and political fealty that you feel like is happening. You all write, quote, "For decades, our former office earned a reputation for winning significant cases while playing by the rules. We hope that the next few months will provide an opportunity to begin an effort to restore this reputation. That, however, will require candor from U.S. Attorney Andrew Boutros, the courage to stand above and apart from political fealty." Now, of course, Andrew Boutros has said that he and his office have acted irrespective of politics. Patrick, you all clearly disagree with that.
We think it's a serious concern that should be raised. I mean, there's a justice manual that has to be followed by everybody. People who signed this letter, Brandis, there were 7 decades of people. Offices were not ever perfect, and it's about how you did that job. And I do think what brought us all together is the standard of doing that job. And I overlap with Andrew. He's a very competent lawyer. He knows how the standards should be followed. And I think that's what we were really writing about.
So you both mentioned another case that is before Judge Coleman, because yesterday that judge ordered an evidentiary hearing in a separate high-profile case also relating to Loretto Hospital. In that case, the same AUSA who has prosecuted the Broadview 6 case is also the prosecutor in the Loretto Hospital case. John, could we see more of this happening in the Northern Districts?
Well, just on the basis of what you just described, it at least suggests that with respect to this particular prosecutor and other cases she's had, maybe that was a practice that she had. Now, whether that extends to the other lawyers in the office, I can't say.
But Brandis, just to know that this Loretto case, this is the very kind of case that the office gets the headlines for. It's a $900 million alleged fraud. If that case has to be dismissed because of the compromise, that's a serious stain on the office, because those, if you take the immigration and then the big cases, if both of those are gone, that's a problem.
Stain on the office in that it is a failure to adequately prosecute what might have been a $900 million fraud problem.
Again, the process will play out, but the Loretto case, that is the kind of case that office over 7 decades is sort of famous, if you will, for doing, bringing big ticket fraud cases, big ticket public corruption, gang, terrorism. That is what that office is known for.
The stain on the office, I would suggest, on top of what Patrick said, now judges are wondering when the U.S. Attorney's Office says something to them, are they hearing the truth? That has never, in my experience, ever been an issue prior to this circumstance.
Right. We've heard Judge Perry say that there's this loss of trust, right? John, what do you think Andrew Boutros should do to go about restoring his office's reputation? Because you all did not call for his resignation, as have some elected officials.
Well, first of all, to acknowledge and to accept what is true, which are that these prosecutions were flawed, and to recognize them as having been flawed, and to say, we're going to fix this, and to explain how he's going to fix it. There's a separate kind of related point, but it's a more macro point about him, and that is that the cases the office traditionally did are not being investigated and prosecuted now. So now you're having cases which are state court gun cases being brought in federal court, or small drug cases being brought in federal court to get statistics, as opposed to working on the systemic problems, gang cases like the Black Gangster Disciples, organized crime cases,
so you're saying
public
you're taking some of
cases.
the smaller state cases out of state court, picking those up in federal, which means they're not chasing some of the bigger, weightier cases. That's where we'll have to leave it. Obviously, like both of you said, we'll have to watch this play out even further. John Gallo, Patrick Collins, thanks to you both for joining us.
Thank you.
And we have an open invitation out to Chicago's U.S. Attorney Andrew Boutros to join us on this program. Up next, this year's Puerto Rican Heritage Festival honors a major moment in the city's history. You may have spotted some Puerto Rican flags flying across the city this month as the community prepares for this weekend's parade and festival. But this year's annual festivities celebrate more than just pride and culture. It also honors the history of Chicago's Boricua community, marking the 60-year anniversary of the first Division Street riots. There were two riots, one in 1966 and another in 1977, both from Puerto Ricans in Humboldt Park, responding to police brutality and neighborhood disinvestment. Joining us now with more are Jose Lopez, Executive Director and co-founder of the Puerto Rican Cultural Center, Alderperson Jesse Fuentes of the 26th Ward, Sabrina Alicea, co-founder of Somos Arte, an arts nonprofit focused on arts education for youth and uplifting women artists in the Puerto Rican community, and Javier Vargas, documentary filmmaker behind Humboldt Park 1977 and the Humboldt Park riots. Thanks to all of you for joining us. Javier, I want to start with you, please, because we're talking about two riots here, one in 66, another in 77. Remind us of the difference between the two, please. What was happening?
66 riots, there's not much of a difference other than 66 riots was more of an uprising. I mean,
a rebellion.
Yeah, rebellion. They finally had it by the police mistreatment, the fact that the city services, lack of city services, housing was really bad. 77 riots, by that point, we did have community leaders. We had organizations in place. By then, we had some Latinos in the force.
So some changes, but not enough.
Some changes, not enough. The police was still on top of the community. Now we also had activities with gangs that are also fighting. So that part of it never changed. I mean, it's better now. So I think that's the differences. I think the 77 riots also brought us politicians, which changed a lot.
Which we have many of today, yes. Speaking of, Alderperson Fuentes, tell us about this year's parade and how it's honoring the 66th Division Street uprising.
Yeah, absolutely. This is the 48th annual Puerto Rican People's Day Parade, which was birthed out of the 1977 riots. The year after, 1978, was the first parade. This year, I think we're doing a couple things. We are honoring the resilience of the Puerto Rican community and our ability not just to celebrate culture and show the best of who we are as Puerto Ricans, but to pay homage to the history that has gotten us to this point. You know, I represent Humboldt Park, a vibrant Puerto Rican community, and I represent Paseo Boricua, one of the most beautiful Puerto Rican corridors in the diaspora. And so we want to be able to pay history, and Javier's documentary of the murder of Rafael Cruz and Julio Osorio do that for us. And we also want to pay homage to our intersectionality. And so this year we're also paying homage to the LGBTQ community, honoring the mayor of Isabela, who is one of the first queer mayors in Puerto Rico. I also serve as one of the dignitaries of this year's parade. And so there's going to be a lot. Our ability to reflect and our ability to work towards the future.
Sabrina, why do you think it's important to honor this history?
I mean, it's absolutely important for us to know our history so that we can know what our community has been fighting for this entire time. We've been a marginalized community from day one, and that doesn't mean that we've put, our arms down and stopped fighting for the things that we believe in and taking up space.
Jose Lopez, you were there the day of the 66
Yes.
uprising. What do you remember from that day? What was it like?
I remember we had gone to the parade downtown. We came back. I was 16 years old. I started my job at Perlman Drugstore on Division and Damon. And across the street, it was where the young man Arcelis Cruz was shot by the police. The police came in. There was a little problem inside of the tavern in that corner, and obviously people just took to the street. They carried him, they literally carried him to the hospital, to St. Mary's Hospital, and from there I could see Perlman's Drugstore right there. That was where I was working, and that was obviously, as Javier said, a real uprising against the socioeconomic, political, and cultural exclusion of the Puerto Rican people.
Why do you think it's so important to continue to remember this history 60 years later?
Well, 60 years later, we can count on someone like Jesse Fuentes, who's a product of our initiative. She's a product of one of our institutions, our high school, an alternative high school built in 1972 to address the issue of Puerto Rican high school dropouts in Chicago. And we're looking at this parade, which is now in its 40th year, that we brought, literally, we obviously brought it to Humboldt Park, in downtown, the midst of Humboldt Park, to be able to generate also economic activity, and it becomes a total immersion into the magicalness, into the beauty and the wonders of Puerto Rican culture.
Sounds like a fun place to be. So, Javier, what were some of the causes? We've talked a little bit around it today. Some of the causes of the riots and the protests in '77.
Again, police aggression was one of the big ones. No city services. So a lot of the stuff I said earlier, that really never took. It changed some from '66 to '77, but it was still there. I mean, the fact that if you walk down the street, a police officer can grab you and take you to the rival gang and then just release you and say, hey, we got Puerto Ricans in this neighborhood, and then you would get chased out of there or get beat up. So, you know, that's the kind of stuff that never changed until later on after the riots.
Alderperson Fuentes, the riots, of course, they were not without their controversy, right? There was a significant amount of property damage. People fought with the police as well. Do you think the '77 riots are remembered in the same light as the rebellion of '66?
I do. I think in our community, we do a great job at being able to educate folks on the conditions that existed at that time. Look, when you concentrate poverty, when you brutalize the people through an agency like the police department, when you leave people in deplorable housing conditions. Look, at this time, both in '66 and the '70s, it didn't stop. We had landlords that were setting their buildings on fire for profit. These were families that were living in these buildings, children who needed a roof over their head. Our people were exhausted. And so when we think about the vehicles that were burned, or when we think about the sort of assault we were seeing, our people had been enduring those conditions for years. And so I think we have to be able to continue to educate people on those conditions. And, you know, we've done a lot of work in the last 60 years to change those conditions. I mean, just in the last year and a half, we've brought over 225 affordable housing units to Humboldt Park, so we can house families with dignity and respect. We're sending more Puerto Ricans to the police force. That doesn't make it perfect, but it means we have representation and an understanding for our culture. And I think we have to continue to do everything that we can to build a Puerto Rican community that we're all proud of.
Sabrina, we've talked a little bit about, you know, the celebration and sort of paying homage to the LGBTQ plus community in this year's celebration, because sometimes, you know, marginalized communities can be left out of these kinds of things. Yes. Why do you think it's important to center Boricua women as well as, you know, LGBTQ plus folks?
You know, in a lot of the conversations within the community in general, we've done a really fantastic job of uplifting LGBTQ voices, for sure. That's been something that's been very much highlighted in the Puerto Rican community. Our work, it's almost out that has to deal with arts and art education, and in that world we still see a dominance of male artists who are really, you know, taking the lead on a lot of things. And we just want to make sure that Puerto Rican women are also celebrated, because in a lot of communities, Puerto Rican, and a lot of communities, women in general, and especially in the Puerto Rican community, we hold down a lot of things. We are the center and the crux, and sometimes we're the silent person that's often behind, you know, some of the men who are doing things. So for us, it's very important to make sure that those voices are uplifted as well.
That's right.
Jose, we've got about 45 seconds left each year for the past 60 years of Puerto Rican Parade. And for over 40 years, we've talked about, you know, the Puerto Rican Festival as well, honoring these two historical moments. But of course, the community still faces issues. What are members of the Puerto Rican community still fighting for?
Well, we're fighting against gentrification and the spatial deconcentration of the Puerto Rican people, which began literally in the 70s in Lincoln Park, in obviously then Westtown, Wicker Park, Bucktown. We've been excluded, and We have created a community that I believe is exemplary because it hasn't been done because of gentrification. We have right now, just this past year, we opened 8 new businesses just on Paseo Boricua. I don't know of any area that can do this without having major investment from outside. This has come organically from the community. So I think there's an organic transformation. That's what really informs, I believe, a good way to do and build community.
All right, that's where we'll have to leave it. I think that's a really good place to leave it. Head to Humboldt Park this weekend, y'all. I know y'all will be there. Thanks to Jose Lopez, Alderperson Jesse Fuentes, Sabrina Alicea, and Javier Vargas. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And for more details on this weekend's events and others happening throughout the summer, check out our online festival guide. We're back to wrap things up right after this.
Reflecting the people and perspectives that make up our communities, this story is part of Chicago Tonight, Latino Voices.
And that's our show for this Thursday night. Join us tomorrow night at 5:30 and 7 for the Week in Review. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Brandis Friedman. Thank you for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and have a good night.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm that supports educational initiatives in the legal profession.